Do you have a loved one who went missing or was murdered while traveling abroad? Is your family still searching for answers? At the Last Trip podcast, we believe these stories deserve to be heard. We want to amplify your voice, share your loved one's story, and help bring awareness to their case. If you are a family member or friend of someone who vanished or lost their life while traveling, we want to hear from you. Your story could help spark new leads, keep their memory alive, and push for the justice they deserve. Reach out to us at the Last Trip Podcast at gmail.com or DM us on Instagram at the Last Trip Crime Pod to share your story. Together, we can shine a light where it's needed most. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned on the fasten seatbelt sign. If you haven't already done so, please make sure the volume of this podcast is set perfectly to your listening enjoyment. Please take your seat, whether that's on the treadmill, car, sofa, or bed, and buckle in for the last trip. My name is Jamie Beebe, and I'll be your tour guide, recreating someone's last days in paradise. On behalf of myself and everyone behind the scenes, please enjoy the Last Trip podcast. And because nobody likes a long flight to get to where they want to be, let's prepare for takeoff. On December 4th, 2024, we released episode 56, The Case of Skye Budnick. In that episode, I walked you through the timeline of events and shared the details investigators and her family made to the public. If you're not familiar with Skye's case or want to refresh your mind, please go back and listen to that episode again. In this episode, I'm joined by Skye's sister, Megan Lebron, as we take a deeper look at who Skye was, the challenges her family has faced since she disappeared, and any new developments in the case. On April 1st, 2008, without telling anyone, Skye boarded a one-way flight to Japan. After arriving, she was seen at an inn in northern Japan, but from there, her trail ended and the mystery only deepened. No one knows why she went to Japan, what happened once she got there, or where she is now. Her family has had to navigate a new country, culture, and language to try to find Skye. But almost 17 years later, they still don't have answers. Megan, your dedication to finding Skye has been unwavering, and I can only imagine how difficult the journey has been for you. Thank you so much for being here today and sharing your story.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It means a lot. Any coverage that I can bring to Skye's story is what this is all about. So again, thank you.
Tell me more about Skye. What was she like as a kid? What are some of your favorite memories of her? What kind of person did she grow into? And what do you miss most about her?
She was the youngest child. She's 4 years younger than me, 6 years younger than my brother. And she was the baby of the family. She was my dad's favorite for sure. My brother and I were really, really picky eaters. Skye was like the garbage disposal. Like she would eat everything. And my dad was the same way. So they would have these like weird little competitive eating things, not like contests or like challenges or anything like that. But it was just like they were so proud that they could really eat. I think my dad just loved that about her. It was just something that they were able to connect on. I remember when she was real little, she was so loving. She would give everybody hugs. As like the older sister, I was never that type of person. I was like, don't ever touch me. Don't even look at me. But Skye was like, I'm here for the hugs. I felt like things started to change though when she went to school. I think everything changes when you go to school.
Did she have a lot of friends or was she bullied? How did things change?
She didn't have too many friends growing up. She was friends with our next door neighbor who was just a year younger than she was, and they would hang out all the time. But then it felt like if there was something that Skye didn't want to do, then she didn't do it, and she let the other person know. She had her boundaries, which was good, but it was really off-putting to a lot of people. So it did kind of alienate her. She did start to kind of withdraw, I would say, maybe in like middle school and things like that. But she had one friend that was in the neighborhood who would come over like every day. She was older than Skye. She was maybe like 3 years older than Skye. and they would hang out all the time. So that was her closest friend. But since there was an age difference, they didn't necessarily hang out in school because there was that age difference.
Skye loved Japan. Everything about Japan, the culture, the style, all of that. Where did that kind of come from?
That's a really good question. I would say probably hanging out with my brother. My brother is really into video games, really into Pokemon. I think there was this shift in cartoons in the late 90s where there was a lot more Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh, Dragon Ball Z. There was like that stuff. And I think that was an introduction to this. And Skye went deeper. Skye was into it. I think she was into Sailor Moon for a little bit. Those are mainstream, but she just went into it. I feel like once she got into the internet, she just dug. She went into those rabbit holes and looked for different kind of anime.
Or do you think she was interested more in just the Japanese culture, or was it interest in traveling and all the other cultures that were unique and different?
It was the Japanese culture. It was mainly she would order a lot of stuff from Japan. It would be like snacks, toys, action figures, things like that. She would get a lot of toys and ordered a lot of manga and like DVDs.
In school, she was studying Japanese as well, right? Was she doing well at it? Was she into the studying part, or did she just kind of want to immerse herself in it?
I think she just wanted to immerse herself into it and not necessarily do the work that she needed to do in order to completely fulfill what she wanted to do, and that was to go to Japan and study abroad.
What was going on in your life when Skye left for Japan? You had a lot going on, and I think that there were a couple of days where no one really realized that she was actually missing, or that she'd even left because she didn't tell anyone.
I know. I was working full-time and I had a part-time job. She was 21, I was 24. There was a bit of a gap. You're trying to figure out your life at that point. Like nobody knows what they're doing or what's going on. I was in a relationship, like a new relationship. I was working full-time. I had a part-time job. Skye was going to school. She had her friends. She had her J Club, which is like the Japanese club that she had at Central. And that's what she had going on. I feel like we kind of overlapped in some ways because I started taking her out to a few shows, little things like that. Because I was excited that she was getting older and I was excited that we were going to start like doing things together. She wasn't always down. But at that point, right before she went missing, I just feel like we were just stuck in the grind of things, just like the day to day, everything kind of runs into each other. You can't tell the difference between yesterday and today.
I think that's life when you're in your 20s.
I know. I think it's just life in general.
Well, and you've been going for years looking for Skye, which we'll get into. She left without telling anybody. Is that something that you would have expected?
No, it was unexpected. None of her friends knew it. Nobody saw it coming. Was there a shift in her emotional state? Yeah. But ultimately, seeing that she had never left the state by herself at all, it was completely unexpected.
When you look back, were there any signs that she was going to leave or that she was doing some big thing or had any plans?
No. Even in hindsight, like, yeah, you can see shifts in somebody's emotional state being a little depressed or not. That was kind of like the norm in my household. Everybody had their waves. So it wasn't anything that none of us had seen before or experienced. It wasn't that shocking. It wasn't such a shift in behavior that rang any bells, In hindsight, we can say, oh, okay, the cupcake thing, maybe the demeanor changed a little bit from sad to happy or something like that. But in the grand scheme of things, there was no like huge shift.
She was young and she just went to Japan by herself.
Yeah.
I more recently started traveling more in my 30s where I've traveled a lot solo. And I don't think I could have done it when I was that age, especially years ago. This is before the technology that we have now. Technology changes so much. Would you expect her to be able to navigate something like that?
No, 100% no. Not at all. And so that's always stumped us because she didn't have a cell phone. The internet infrastructure over there was different in 2008 compared to here in the States. And when I went over there, I couldn't even use my computer. My phone didn't work. So even if she had anything, it wasn't going to work over there. When I went in 2008, I remember we didn't have like GPS, So I was taking photographs of everything and referencing it. Because when we were going around the city, I was like, how are we going to find our way back? Because it's all in Japanese. And that's what I did at the time. But we stayed pretty local at that time too. We stayed within the area that the police deemed like, hey, this is probably best for you, considering the circumstances. You may be out of your depth if you venture out too far. I think that was good advice. I feel like at the time, and even over the past several years, I was always a little angry that we didn't venture out further while we were there. Given the fact that we had the opportunity to go back last year, that totally changed because I understood why. Once we went out to Nobori Betsu and we were able to do more exploring, I was like, oh, yeah, we would have been a mess had we done that. So Skye traveling solo with nothing, there's no way. There's no way.
Do you think she had help? Was there somebody somewhere helping her?
All of that is speculation. I personally believe that there had to be somebody. Either somebody planned something out for her or somebody told her where to go and was like watching her along the way, or somebody met her and was there. I don't know if somebody met her and was physically there the entire time. I feel like she had instructions as to where to go to end up where she went. That's what I personally believe.
That's kind of what I thought when I researched the case. Obviously, I just researched it. You've lived it. I couldn't have navigated that. I went to Japan this year and I couldn't navigate it. It's a very big, difficult place to navigate. Even if you speak a little bit of Japanese, it's still very difficult.
Yeah. I know there was a huge difference from 2008 to last year in our own experience. We have GPS, we have the Translate app on our phones. I used Hotels Tonight to book hotels randomly along the way. Things like that, where prior to that, I would have to make a phone call to make a reservation. We were able to change our flight a few times. It was easy.
If she did have help, either there or to get there, do you have any thoughts on who this person could have been to her? Was it someone she met online, a boyfriend, a girlfriend?
Skye never had any real relationships that I know of, but I feel like she always wanted one in a way that she was never able to have where she was. So I don't know if she specifically sought out a relationship online with somebody or if somebody like promised her something and she just kind of fell for it. I felt like Skye was a little either trusting, just a little naive. I could definitely see her kind of like falling for somebody saying that they're promising her something that just wasn't going to pan out.
When you first realized Skye was missing, how did you navigate that? What was the path? What were the steps? Did you know anything at all about what to do?
No, we knew nothing. And so did everybody we asked. Even the police had no idea what to do. So when we first realized she went missing, we called the police. They took like 2 hours to get to the house. I mean, it's barely 5 miles away. We should have just drove down, but being in complete hysterics, we thought that they should come to the house. The first police officer that we met with was cold and mean and yelled at my mom. So it didn't start well. Since Skye was 21, they're not taking it seriously. It is not a priority. She is an adult. Unless there is a paper trail of either mental health issues or criminal activity, there's nothing that they can do. When we found out that Skye went to Japan, like once we were able to access the email, we let the police officer know. And he told us to go to the airport, try to find her car. He didn't care. I think he made a call to the airport to make sure she got on the plane, to make sure it was confirmed. But that was it. After that, it was out of their jurisdiction. I remember me, my mom, my dad, and my then boyfriend, now husband, went to the airport and we found her car. And then we drove it home. The police never asked to see the car, never went into Skye's room, never took inventory of anything. Then they kind of helped us navigate the process of contacting officials in Japan. They helped as best as they could, but they themselves didn't know. It's a small town. There's no manual for them to follow. They were able to get in touch with the embassy, and then the embassy became our contact. The embassy let us know that we actually had to physically go to Japan to file a missing persons report. My mom had to get her passport, had to get that expedited because she didn't have one. I had one. It was determined that it was just going to be me and my mom going. We booked our flights with the help of people at the embassy. The embassy was just like, this is where you want to go. Because we hadn't been there before. We knew nothing about Sapporo. I felt like everybody was kind of stumped. They kind of treated it like a disruption and a problem that they didn't want. So they did kind of take it seriously because they didn't want bad PR. It always felt like it was about optics and PR in certain aspects. So we filed a missing persons report on April 3rd. We were able to get to Japan by April 10th. And that's a lot of time. Like, you're already behind, you know? You can't tell the Japanese police to go start the investigation because they want you there to file a missing persons report. So it didn't start until the 10th. When we got to Japan, the officials were there to meet with us, and they took our statement and everything in the airport. It was a blur. After like the 14-hour trip to Tokyo and then another 2-hour trip to Hokkaido, we were not in like the right state of mind to be just getting off the plane and trying to tell this story. Oh my God.
How did you feel that you were treated by the police in Japan, the authorities in Japan? And what was the United States doing for you at this time?
I felt like the police in Japan were respectful and they were helpful and they were sympathetic. They definitely worked as a team. It felt like they took it seriously, but again, there's the difference in culture and I don't know the language. So I didn't know how things were coming across. You're missing the nuances in language and the gestures and things like that because you're not familiar with it. So I don't know how they really felt. We were in touch with the embassy. The people at the embassy helped as best as they could. One of the ambassadors took us from the airport to the hotel and then proceeded to tell us how to use like public transit and stuff to get around. But that was it. So we got in on a Thursday night. Then Friday we went to the embassy and they gave us flyers. They're like, maybe you can pass this out around town because they're closed on the weekend. So they're like, keep yourself busy. Not a great suggestion. That didn't turn out so well.
I can't imagine that first time showing up and then having to navigate the authorities, the media, looking for your sister. Did you feel like you'd step off the plane and boom, you'd just find your sister? I mean, that's what I would think.
Kinda, yeah. Because once we got there and once we were walking around the city, we had the weekend essentially to kind of see things. So when we were in the city, we were like, oh, she's going to stick out. This is going to be easy. And then this is going to be a crazy story to tell later. And me and my mom were pretty chill the first few days because it just seemed like we're going to have to find her. This has just been the crazy thing. And then at a certain point, it took a turn because it wasn't moving at that fast pace that I thought it was, like she was going to show up. And we were there. We did a press conference. They got a few leads in. And that's when we realized that she had been seen at an inn in Noboribetsu on the 10th. And that was the same day we came. But then the press conference wasn't until I think like the 13th. So again, there's more time. Nothing's being done.
I think that she would have really stuck out where she had gone. Even in Tokyo, I was like, oh, I'm super blonde. People notice that I'm there.
Yeah.
My boyfriend has tattoos on his face. So we were a very noticeable couple when we were there.
Mm-hmm.
Where she was, it was mostly Japanese and there weren't a whole lot of tourists.
Yeah.
Do you think people saw her and maybe didn't reach out and tell you because within the culture, they're quieter. They want to stay out of people's business.
Yeah.
But I feel like people had to have seen her step by step.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. There's definitely people there who probably did see her. But due to the culture, they're not taking on anything that they have to then be responsible for. It's just not something they're going to do. And I get that. That's one of the reasons why when we were trying to pass out the flyers, they wouldn't take it, because there's no way to really communicate that and also explain like the behavior, why they won't. I 100% believe people had seen her, because the people that came forward were people like a man from Austria or Australia, I can't remember, but the guy who helped her at one of the train kiosks, he wasn't Japanese. And then a taxi driver who, it was a service that he provided her, so maybe he felt more comfortable coming forward. And again, the people at the 2 different inns, both confirming that she was there. And those are not just people on the street who saw her. These are people who interacted with her because of a service. So I felt in that realm, they'll come forward. But if it's just anybody else on the street or a simple interaction, they won't.
So you get there, you're looking for her yourself, you're handing out flyers, you're talking to the authorities, getting a few leads. The press conference happens. And what was that like, doing this press conference? Because I think it would have been so emotional, draining, exhausting, and scary.
Yes, all of that. I also felt like I was just running on adrenaline, and I felt like I was trying to protect my mom. I quickly went into a role of like, oh, I have to be in charge. My mom was going through it, she was trying to put on a brave face. And I think she did pretty good. But when it comes to speaking with others and public speaking too, she just clams up, and she has a speech impediment, and it becomes much more apparent when she's nervous. Like she can't get a word out. So I felt like I had to step in and I had to be the person in charge. Nobody asked me to, but like given my dad had stayed home and he is the same way, my brother as well, it was just like there's no other option. Somebody has to. The police wanted my mom to speak first at the press conference, and I think she read something. Then I tried to answer the questions. It was a bigger turnout than we expected. We just figured 2 or 3 reporters, but they had a whole conference room full of reporters and cameras. We had somebody who volunteered to be our translator. I think that was in conjunction with somebody at the embassy. And he was super sweet. Everybody was really nice. And they were really respectful. When it came to the press coverage that we got, it was really respectful. So it felt reassuring. It felt like if she went missing, at least it's in Japan. I know it's a weird thing to say.
Japan is a pretty safe country.
Yeah.
Especially the area where she went. It's not Tokyo, it's not a huge city. And overall, Japan is a pretty safe country.
Yeah.
After the press conference, you're still looking for her, and there's no more clues coming in. What's your next step?
This is where I think we were relying on the authorities a little too much. Because basically they were like, we have all the information, we're waiting on leads, we'll look and investigate when something comes in that is reliable info. And then they told us, we'll call you when we find something. And so we waited. And in the beginning, there were a few phone calls. But then after that, we heard nothing for a really long time. It was maybe a year later, my mom got a phone call from the Southington Police Department. And they were like, oh, we were going through some old case files. We want to know if Skye ever came home. And my mom hasn't answered the house phone since. In 17 years, has not answered the house phone.
They basically pushed it aside, didn't think about it until they were going through old case files again.
Do you know what's also crazy? Oh my God, when we went to Japan just this past year, the same thing happened. We went, and then 2 or 3 weeks later, the Southington Police Department's going through old case files, and they called the house asking if we ever found Skye. And my dad answered, and he's like, why don't you go ask the detective that just went to Japan about this case? There's zero communication between most law enforcement, even within the same office.
What was that first year like? I truly can't imagine waiting, but no other choice. You have to just wait and see. You can't move to Japan.
Yeah.
Were people reaching out at all? Was Japan reaching out? What else were you doing?
Waiting, waiting, and slowly losing our minds, becoming a shell of ourselves. That's basically what was happening. There was very little communication. We were super frustrated with everything. I know that the police had come by because they were talking about the new database, like the DNA database. That was just starting in Connecticut. So they got our DNA, and then it was held in the Connecticut State Lab. And they're like, once everything's up and running and it's all connected, this will be sent over to Interpol and in Japan. And it never was. Never was.
Do you think when you took over at that press conference, it changed something in you? Because you've been a driving force looking for Skye all these years later, continually, relentlessly, not giving up. And you've been the spokesperson. What types of things have you done to find Skye throughout all these years? You've done so much.
In the beginning, it wasn't much. I tried, but it always felt like people didn't want to hear it. And it was really discouraging. It wasn't until almost a decade later where I was able to actually start focusing on it a little bit more.
When she went missing, we didn't have social media like we do today. You couldn't put out a video on TikTok saying your sister's missing and the whole world sees it.
I know. Well, we had YouTube, and the first thing I did put out a YouTube video just to see what kind of audience I could reach. I reached the worst audience in the world who basically said she's dead and go kill yourself. So we immediately took that down. Actually, when I was moving, I was going through my old computer and I found it. And I did not watch it. Maybe one day I'll watch it. But my mom was on it. Skye's friend was on it. I was on it. And we're all just like hysterical. But yeah, social media and everything wasn't the same. Skye had her Facebook page and she had friends write on it and stuff like that. But it wasn't until I started the TikTok page 2021 where I found the right medium for it. It was life-changing to be able to create something and it worked because it just felt so discouraging after dealing with the authorities and the lack of progress. The whole thing was frustrating and discouraging and I wanted to give up, and how it changed my whole family. It was one of the reasons why I moved away. I lived in California for 10 years and I needed that. I needed the shift. I ran away from the problems because I couldn't talk about it with my family. Nobody was talking about it. It wasn't until I was able to get the distance and I had my son, and then I was going to be home from work and I was going to be alone with my son. And I was like, I need to do some work on me because I'm dealing with a lot of things that I've been trying to run from.
During those 10 years before you started the TikTok, before you dove back in so hard, what were you learning? Were you learning anything, or was it something where you tried to keep pushing it away? Was it something where you're like, nope, not thinking about that today?
Yeah. Yeah, there was a lot of that, just not thinking about it, letting it grow and fester on the inside. Because what eventually happened is I no longer had anxiety in the same way. I no longer felt my depression in the same way. It became like physical. It started presenting itself in different ways. And I acknowledged that, hey, there might be a reason for this. Like, I think you need to deal with your shit. I think also having the time, I felt like you cannot look for a missing person and work a 40-hour work week, try to pay your bills, try to have any kind of semblance of a life or social life or any kind of relationship. You cannot do it. Our life is not structured in that way. So something has to give. And it's usually the thing that's the hardest. And that's the thing also that's the most important.
When you started the TikTok, what was the response? What were people saying and how did it make you feel?
I felt like when one of my videos got 10,000 views, and I was like, "Oh my god, I made it!" Like, I felt like people are seeing me, and I felt so seen, and then that was an issue. I felt like I don't wanna be perceived as a person, but it felt like, "Okay, this might be what I need. This might be the platform that is gonna work for this." So I just started talking a little bit more about Skye and started talking about my own issues and the reality of things, because I feel like having a missing family member is, unfortunately, a lot of people do know what it's like, but a lot of people don't. And when they don't, they're totally misinformed. So it's like putting a face to it. So the videos started gaining traction and starting finding the right people. My audience is like 97% women. So it's safe. We're good. I was lucky enough to find the right audience who understood, who I didn't need to like try to sell them on anything. I wasn't trying to paint Skye or my family in this beautiful light. We were just real people dealing with a real problem that nobody has any standard protocol for.
It's not like what you see on TV, where by the end of the episode, they've found the missing person and it's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's not like that at all.
No, not at all.
Especially dealing with another country, another culture, another language, somewhere you've never been. Before internet, before social media,
Yeah.
it was all stacked against you.
Yeah.
Once you started the TikTok page, did you get more leads?
No. It didn't help in that sense, no. I didn't reach, like, Japan in that way. They're not on the same kind of TikTok algorithm. They have another platform there, Line, I believe, but they have something else going on. There's a whole different internet out there, too. We're very self-centered. We think things are just all about us. But there's a whole other world out there, and they use other things, and we're not always connected in that way. So there weren't any new leads, and that was a little disappointing, but I also didn't expect that. I think my main thing was actually trying to get myself a little healing. I felt like this was going to be a cathartic experience sharing this. But when I saw how many people I was reaching, I was like, I need to really get into this. I really need to transition to talk about Skye's case and the fact that it was large enough to get the attention of the police again, the FBI, and Japan, which was the craziest part. They were watching my TikToks. There's a Interpol analyst that I think has watched all my TikToks. That poor girl.
Your TikToks are amazing in the way that it's completely genuine, raw, and real. Like you said, you're not trying to sugarcoat anything. You're not trying to portray anything other than you're not, which I think is why people started watching your TikToks so much and loving it and falling in love with you and falling in love with Skye and seeing that realness. It's scary. It's scary to watch a family go through that because automatically you're like, well, I go on vacation. My mom goes on vacation. You start thinking, what would I do in this situation?
Yeah.
And I think in that way, your TikTok has helped a lot of people out there. Did you learn anything about navigating a missing person or theories or anything else that people came forward to you with that you learned about Skye or anything?
I felt like a lot of people left comments. They would say something that would kind of shift my perspective a little bit and look at something differently. I wish I had all these people behind me when I was first dealing with the police because there's so many questions I never asked or never thought of. And that has been helpful. And it's also been like, God, why didn't I think about that? I can like kick myself.
When you're emotional and you're in it, you're never going to think about those questions.
No.
The only question is, where is she? Where is she? Where is she?
Yeah.
There's no diving into the questions.
Yeah. That's been helpful. Getting like new perspective and just the support has been nice.
Along with the TikTok, you've also made a podcast called Surviving Skye, which I have listened to every episode. It's amazing. I've cried with you or for you. I think it's such a good podcast.
Thank you.
What made you decide to move from TikTok to the podcast? And has that helped at all.
Yeah, it was because of TikTok. I felt like I needed to tell a bit more detail on certain things, and TikTok only had like 3-minute long videos then, and I didn't really want to make a series. I can't commit to things necessarily like that. That's just a me problem. So when I started the podcast, it was just to get more detail into it. It was also to hopefully reach a different kind of audience because not everybody's on TikTok. They always tell you to diversify and have things on every platform. That's a full-time job, guys. I don't know who's doing that. It's so hard. But ultimately, the goal is to always reach more people. You have to put it all out there.
Once you brought Skye's name full force back into the media, social media, police were watching, authorities were watching in Japan and the US, what movements happened on the case? Did you learn anything on even back to Japan? I know there has been some updates.
Maybe like 2023, I got a call from the police department because I was writing them emails, and it was a couple months later, they followed up with an email wanting to know if we had ever found Skye's car. Right?
Wow.
I know.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my God. Yes, we found Skye's car, but we never found Skye. And at the time, Skye's car was in the driveway. My dad held on to that. And he was just updating police notes and things like that. And I was just like, is there anything more we can do? What's going on with the DNA? And that's when we found out that the DNA was never submitted. And so we were like, okay, what do we do? How do we get there? Then it was radio silence for a while. Turns out that detective got promoted and moved on to another department. So we got another detective. He was a bit more willing to listen. And then he started to push for getting in touch with Interpol and getting in touch with State Lab and having them connect to get the DNA over. And he found it frustrating because there was a lot of legality to that he didn't realize. We had to get some district attorney to sign off to release the DNA. And then it turns out when Interpol was able to make contact with Japan didn't take that style of DNA, whatever format it was in. That opened up the door to go to Japan. It turns out that there was a new agency being formed, like literally started at the end of 2023. And it was an agency between Interpol and the FBI to help find fugitives and missing people. And Skye's case came across their table, and they were like, maybe we can work with this. They put an analyst on the case and did all this digging, tried to track Skye's IPs everywhere. They had the binder they brought with them to Japan, and they had me look at it, and it was all my TikToks. It was kind of horrifying.
Whatever it takes, though, whatever it takes.
I know. Because, like, I never thought that this would happen. When I started TikTok, I was just like, I need help. I need to, like, tell this story. And then it just became so much more. And it was like a happy accident. And then we got movement. We were able to get the attention, and they're like, the most actionable thing we can do. And the most actionable thing I felt like we could do for the past several years was to get DNA back to Japan, just in case there's any unidentified bodies or anything like that. That was the most we can do, because you can't send out a search party looking like we don't know where to look. And because of the TikTok and the podcast, it made that happen, which is pretty fucking awesome.
It is awesome. And so many people don't have that opportunity to get answers, or the theories, I should say, that you've gotten, because you don't have answers.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you know enough about Skye's trip to Japan to come up with a viable theory that you can live with about what happened?
I have my theory, but I feel like it also shifted when we were able to go back to Japan and go into Nobori-Betsu. Being able to see Nobori-Betsu for what it was and get the vibes, it was crazy. I can't even explain like how it felt.
Because this is going back all these years later and seeing that area for the first time.
Yeah. And it was totally different than what we expected. And so that's why so many things in our head, in our scenario of things shifted. I don't believe Skye ever left Nobori-Betsu. I don't know if she passed away there, if she had an accident there. It felt like she never left Nobori-Betsu. Seeing where she stayed And then the distance between the first in to the second in. If she didn't have any money or credit cards or phone, she could have easily gotten just like trapped there. It was out in the middle of nowhere. Even when we went in June, it was a Sunday when we took the cab from where we were staying to like the farthest inn. And by the time we got back, you need to pay. And I didn't have enough yen on me. I was short a few yen. And I was like, oh, we'll use my card. And they're like, well, we don't take cards. It's a cash-based area. If you're not prepared for that, if you run out of money, you're stuck. You're stuck, especially in 2008, because we felt stuck in 2024. Where she was, there was no town nearby. There was just a few inns. There wasn't a bank or anything. There was nothing. So the fact that she did take out money, I don't know what other cash she had on her. We know for a fact it was at least $800 US. I don't know if she knew that she had to have money there, or if she knew to have money because if you had anything else, it would be traceable. It always felt to me that this was planned, and it was planned well. And I don't doubt that Skye could plan something, but to the extent. Either she had a handbook or she had some help.
There are a lot of theories out there. Maybe there's a cult that recruited her. She planned it out to end her own life, or somebody hurt her. Somebody planned it for her and hurt her, or there was an accident. She walked because she didn't have the money for a cab and something happened. What theory are you closest to?
Help, accident, unaliving. Those would be my top 3.
How have you dealt with that since making those theories your top 3? Like mentally, emotionally?
Those have always kind of been my top 3. I feel like those are the most realistic. Anything else? I don't know how realistic, if you really think about the planning and who she might have been connected with. Like, I don't know to what extent who would coerce somebody to go across the world. Sometimes it feels far-fetched, But so does committing suicide, because she loved it. She spent all that travel, all that time alone with your thoughts. Just think about that, like the time on the plane. And you're thinking about, oh, I'm just going to go there. I'm going to love it. And then I'm going to just kill myself. There's just something about that where I'm just like, you're going to talk yourself out of it. Something's going to happen. And then being able to finally see where she went. If you walk into those woods, I don't know if she would. She wasn't an outdoorsy person. But if she walked into them, you're not coming out. It's disorientingly large.
And it wasn't a warm time of year. I'm a total outdoorsy person, and I've done some really stupid shit walking into woods before alone. But I've seen photos of that area. I don't think I'd walk into those woods.
No, I don't think she would either. But another thing, seeing the area, seeing the roads, if she got hit by a car and somebody just drove off and left her, maybe she fell down at like an embankment type of thing. Again, you may not find her. That may be it.
Do you ever think you'll know exactly what happened?
No.
Do you see that in the future? Someone comes forward, anything?
If somebody comes forward, or even if we get a hit with the Jane Doe DNA stuff, there's still going to be so many questions, like what happened in the in-between. So will I ever get the complete answer that I want? No. I don't know if I'll get any answer either.
What impact has this had on you and your family?
Initially, her disappearance just completely destroyed the family. Destroyed. At a certain point, I was ready to write everybody off. Like, I'm done. Like, cut off. Because it just changed everybody. Everybody became depressed. Like, we were depressed before, but like the death of the depression and then the denial of it. Nobody talked about Skye. Nobody went and got help. It actually wasn't until I started talking about it more that I was like, I'm going to confront this. But my dad has never seen a TikTok. My dad has never listened to the podcast. Same with my brother. They know I do it, but they don't want to face it. And that's something I've accepted. I can't change people. I can't heal somebody. Everybody grieves differently. It's going to look different, and you can't hold that against them. But I felt like because I've been able to put it out there, it's helped my relationship with my mom, and it's helped her as well. She still kind of sides with how my dad and my brother handle it, but I feel as though she's gotten a lot better. And I felt more at ease and a bit more confident in the future, I guess, for myself. I live back in Southington. I moved back to where it all happened. And if I wasn't mentally ready for that, I wouldn't have moved back.
I think talking about this kind of trauma is healthy. I talk about mine and it's helped me a lot, but I also think it helps other people. Even listening to your story has helped me deal with some of my things because you're so raw and you talk about yourself as well. And you talk about what you're going through. What type of advice do you have for someone going through this? It does happen. People do go missing in other countries. And it's very difficult and it's a totally different navigation than if someone goes missing from their house.
Yeah.
What advice do you have?
I feel like I need to write a manual because in hindsight, you will do everything different. Because when you're first thrusted into this impossible situation, you will not know what to do. Even if you've seen a movie, you will not know who you are as a person until you are put in a situation like this. So your weaknesses will be on full display, but also you will find out what you're good at. So focus on what you're good at. If it's just to stay calm and make sure everybody's fed, that's okay. You have to really take inventory of yourself from time to time. It's okay to step back for a minute. You will feel guilty. That's okay. Deal with it. Because people need you at your best. But also, if you are trying to gather info, create a new email. Create a new email. I know that sounds silly, but I had used my own personal email on the missing persons flyer. Why did nobody tell me to just start a new email? You know? Things like that. So then other people can have access. So not everything is on your plate.
There's so many things you don't think of. I wouldn't have thought of that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have thought I need a new email for this so that other people can access it. And also because you don't want that to be the first thing that you see when you open your email. You want to put it in a category by itself. So when you need to look at it, when you're ready to look at it, or someone else can do it for you.
Yep. There's a lot of like little things. I would write a list.
You should. You should. It's those little steps that are really important. I wouldn't have thought of that. I've been doing these true crime podcasts for years. I would not have thought of that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's always like the smallest things that could probably make like a world of a difference. And also like document everything. Everybody that you talk to, you will not remember anything once the adrenaline has dropped. I love talking with my mom about our first trip because it's completely different. I don't know what trip she went on and she doesn't know what trip I went on. It's completely different. And also remember that everybody will experience it differently. But their reality is also valid along with yours. The truth is somewhere in between.
one thing that we didn't really mention yet is what if Skye is alive and started a new life?
Good for her.
Right? I think you've kind of put that off to the side, but if she is listening right now, or if you had the chance to talk to her, what would you say to her?
It's okay to reach out now. It's okay. If she was out there listening this whole time, why are you waiting? We're not mad. We just want to know if you're okay. I know when me and my mom were in Newport, we were sitting in Sapporo, and we both agreed that if she was alive, we would just be like, how's your life? How is it here? Tell us about it. You don't have to come home because this is your home. I never got mad with Skye in the action. My dad got mad. My mom was upset. My brother, I couldn't really even tell you how he feels. But everybody felt different. But nobody was ever like, disown her. You know, it was just like, what happened?
I didn't know Skye, but I've listened to everything that you put out there. I read so much. I feel like I know her. I don't think she'd be the type of person to just be like, okay, bye. I do think she would have reached out.
I think so too. I think at some point she might drag her feet out of embarrassment and shame and fear and guilt. She never ever wanted to upset anybody. She wasn't that type of person. She wasn't out to be mean on purpose. So all of this is out of character. But I feel like she would have said something if she's out there. I don't think any of this has ever reached her.
If anyone does happen to have any information or knows anything at all about the case that could possibly help in any way, how can they reach you?
You can always reach the Southington Police Department. You can always reach out to the Japanese National Police, or you can email me. That's survivingsky@gmail.
And that's the name of the podcast. Everyone should listen to
Yeah.
it, subscribe to it. I do. I love
Thank
it.
you.
It helps me. It just helps me with my daily trauma. You're so open, so honest. You say what's ever on your mind.
I feel like my vulnerability is my superpower at this point. So
It is. I think it helps people. It definitely is helpful to hear somebody being vulnerable out there because everyone isn't vulnerable at the right times or when they need to be. And so when you hear somebody else being vulnerable, it helps,
yeah.
especially in these kinds of situations. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, being vulnerable with me, sharing all of this. And I hope that somehow, somewhere you do get answers, but I feel like you've been able to at least feel good about what you know so far.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that.
And finally, remember to leave a review and rate this podcast 5 stars if you like the show, or hell, even if you don't. But either way, feel free to let me know what you think. Please follow The Last Trip on Instagram at The Last Trip Crime Pod and subscribe on Patreon to support the show. You'll get extra research, videos, photos, and updates, and even learn more about my personal travels. That's patreon.com/The Last Trip Podcast. I'm Jamie Beebe, bringing you your last trip and signing off until the next one. Thanks for listening.